Last week we talked a little bit about the nuns, and that's N-O-N-E-S, not N-U-N-S. And it's common for many right now in our culture to want to make the point that they're spiritual but not religious. And again, from this Pew research, religious nuns, a shorthand we use to refer to people who self-identify as atheist or agnostic, as well as those who say that their religion is nothing in particular. Now that makes up roughly 23% of the U.S. adult population. Jumping to the second paragraph, overall, religiously unaffiliated people are more concentrated among young adults than any other group. 35% of millennials, those that were born between 1981 and 1996, are nuns. In addition, the unaffiliated as a whole are getting even younger. The median age of unaffiliated adults is now 36, down from 38 in 2007, and significantly younger than the overall median age of U.S. adults in 2014. And so many say, well, they're spiritual. And to be spiritual is actually a very natural thing. The Christian faith has long asserted that we have in our hearts a sense that God is out there. And we have in our heart a sense that we should communicate with him. And as the saying goes, there are no atheists in foxholes. When we get into a bit of trouble, we look for someone and we call out to God. Spirituality tends also to be fun, because if we can follow our hearts, we follow our feelings, and if we pray, sometimes we can feel spiritual, or if we do a nice thing, we can feel spiritual. Spirituality feels like the path to being a stronger, more beautiful, more in control, more able to get what you want out of life. I was in Midtown a couple days ago, meeting with Mark Holland and walking around a little bit. And I noticed how many shops in Midtown make offers like this. This path of spirituality in many different forms will help make you into a better you, into a stronger you, into a newer you. It's all over the place in our culture. Sometimes the quip about being spiritual but not religious is a complaint against what is sometimes called the Abrahamic religions. Those anti-sex, patriarchal, rule-making Abrahamic religions. The world would be better without them. But actually, if you want to get a glimpse into the world before Judaism became widespread, which really happened through Christianity or Islam, just read history, because there's a lot of world history. In fact, most of world history happened before Christianity really became at least widespread in the West. And if you want to see what the world was like, just look back into those days. And in fact, actually, when we talk about the book of Judges, we are looking back into those days. If you look at a, Raj, I don't know if you can turn down these monitors, they're buzzing. Still buzzing. Oh, well, don't worry about it. If you look at a map in your Bible of the time of the Judges, you'll see that there's these nice little boundaries, that Simeon was here, and Judah was here, and Ephraim was here, and all the different tribes are in these places. But these maps are really quite deceiving. Because if you remember at the end of the book of Joshua, with Joshua, Israel kind of got into the land, but they were in the land in the midst of everyone else. It isn't like a map where we look at today and you see the borders of the United States. that there are actually border patrols and guards and crossings and passport checks. In fact, the land was much more like probably the American frontier was out west before the United States really was able to send the military out after the Civil War and begin to control it. There were just different people in different areas in charge of different places. And as the frontier was with many different Indian tribes in ancient Canaan, there were many different cities and towns and some forts, but many different people groups all there together. And so Israel had kind of gone into this land, and they had become one of the many groups that were there, and they were living there. And of course, if you recall, their mission, in fact, was to take possession of the land, to get rid of the high places, and to begin to dominate the environment. Now, when we read that command, we probably think of something like the ethnic cleansings that have gone on in our own history that we understand. The United States going out west and beginning to control the western part of the continent. I just, in fact, finished reading this book about the history of Europe between Hitler and Stalin, and it was a very grim read. Because essentially what Hitler and Stalin tried to do in Eastern Europe from the 30s and the 40s was to move out certain people groups, either by killing them or depatriating them, sending them some other places, so that pretty much the fertile grounds of Poland and the Ukraine and Belarus could serve their own empires. And sometimes when we read Joshua and Judges, these kinds of images come to mind. But what we fail to appreciate is that, in fact, really, Israel was not like Stalin or Hitler, in that Israel didn't have any power. And if you read the book of Judges, the book of Joshua carefully, you realize that there were only 3 fortified cities that Israel actually took: Jericho, Ai, and Hazor. These are the only 3 fortified cities that Israel actually managed to take during the time of Joshua, which meant basically that Israel was living in the land, and she was, as we talked about a number of weeks ago, not militarily able to take the land. And so when the Lord told them to take the land, it was always kind of with this understanding that if Israel would take the first step, that the Lord would prosper them. But Israel had to, in a sense, take the leap of faith and go up and try before the Lord would work. What happened, however, is that Israel didn't try. So here at the beginning of the book of Judges, the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim and said, I brought you out of Egypt and led you into the land I swore to give to your ancestors. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall not make a covenant with the people of this land. You shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this? I have also said, I will not drive them out. I will not drive them out before you. They will become snares for you, and their gods will become snares for you. After a whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt, and they followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They roused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baals and Asherahs. Now, what's important for us to understand here is that in many ways, what Israel did was simply did what came naturally spiritually. They were spiritual but not religious. One of the interesting things about human beings that we tend not to realize is how communal we really are. If I point to the top picture, some of you can tell me, in fact, what show it came from, but most of you can tell me what decade it came from. Why? The way they're dressed, their style. In fact, Americans like to believe, as I think David Brooks nicely articulated in his book, The Path to Character, Americans like to believe that spirituality comes from the inside, that there's this truest self way down deep inside of me, and that if I try enough experiences, I can find my truest self and then express my truest self in a unique and individual way. What we tend to find, however, is that this truest self kind of looks like everyone else's truest self around us. What's really fun about working with young people is that they all go in and say, well, I just gotta be me, and then all the different me's always look like all the other different me's all over the place. We are communal creatures. We learn from each other. We have fashion, we have styles. And so this spirituality, which we imagine is somehow unique and special within me, actually looks like everyone else's spirituality. The lower picture was from a friend of mine had posted this little video on Facebook of all of these teenage girls going to a baseball game, seemingly paying zero attention to the baseball game and having their snacks and their selfies, and somehow the cameraman who was videoing the baseball game just kind of focused on them to watch them talk and chatter, and the game was just going on in the field, and they were just having a good time with themselves. But this is just how we are. And so when we begin to imagine that I'm going to have my unique special relationship with God, our unique special relationships that we imagine just kind of wells up within us kind of looks like everyone else's. And so what we begin to see is that through this spontaneous, natural, we imagine unique spirituality, that actually our spirituality falls into fairly regular, predictable patterns. Our spiritualities tend to focus on actually our desires. We want this, we fear that, we need this. And so we unconsciously become slaves to our desires, usually in tribal forms. We unconsciously cast ourselves as the consumer, and we use others to meet our needs and satisfy our desires. And we compete for mastery of others, and the environment becomes a function of this. And this is exactly what we see in Canaan. All of the different tribes say, we have our tribal God and we have our tribal spirituality. But these gods and these spiritualities are all about making our tribe great and flourishing our tribe, usually at the expense of the other tribes. Spirituality then becomes justification. And the difficult thing is that if we are all about our spirituality, the God we usually wind up serving most is me. And gods or spiritual powers or other things in the universe are all about having these gods help me to get what I want and what I need. And so we look for the life that we imagine we want, need, or deserve. And we have these gods be our servants to get the things of the relationships or the stories in our lives. And we remove what gets in our way. Spiritualities usually don't pinch on us, don't impinge much on us. Spiritualities become basically the reflection of what we want. A couple of weeks ago, this also showed up. A friend of mine on Facebook noticed it. There was always in this country, there's the debate about abortion. And so the one side said, you should shout about your abortion. And this woman on her Twitter feed said in 1988, a late-term abortion got teenage me back on track for college, career, and motherhood. And so I look at this and I wonder, how often don't we make our children our instruments of self-expression? Or we move our children when they're inconvenient, or we decide to push these things apart because really what I want and need is me. The description of Psalm 106, I wondered if Marshall was going to include these verses because they directly impinge here on the book of Judges. They worshiped their idols, which became a snare to them. They sacrificed their sons and their daughters to false gods. They shed innocent blood, the blood of their sons and daughters, whom they sacrificed to the idols of Canaan and the land was desecrated by their blood. Children are almost always an inconvenience, and there are many inconvenient people in our lives. And when we just say, life has to be about me, others are thrown to the side. And this is usually when we encounter our misery. If spirituality is really about me getting what I want, I continue to be a prisoner of me. And we become users of people in pursuit of the kind of life that looks beautiful to us, imagining it's somehow higher. Here's a funny dynamic about human beings. If you find someone who is actually humble, who is actually selfless, who actually will sit down and listen to our stories, who actually cares about us and the things we care about, that such a person has no end of friends. But such a life does not come naturally. Because you know what it means? It means that the person actually cares, has the capacity to care for someone else besides themselves. What is natural to us is for me to think about me, for me to be obsessed about me. And yeah, I might patiently listen to someone else for a little while, but all in my mind I'm thinking, when are they going to stop talking so I can start talking more about me? Because I find myself to be the most interesting person I imagine. And I sure hope the rest of the world finds me as interesting as I find myself, which of course they never do. And then we wind up in this sea of misery. It's the prison of ourselves. We become prisoners of our own desires, competing with everyone else, seeking their own. You know, if you're a school teacher looking at children, or even if you're working with other groups of people, sometimes you find these lonely people and you think, well, I'll put all these lonely people in a room together and they can be friends with one another. And one of the things that you discover is that often doesn't happen. Because the same skills that have made them lonely continue. And so they can't even make friends with themselves. And so when the person walks in the room that has the patience to listen to their concern, that has enough love to listen to their needs, that actually is able to extend themselves for the other, everyone gravitates to them. And we learn that, in fact, in many ways, this world is filled with us who are needy and lonely and prisoners of ourselves. And this, in fact, is what you see, in a sense, working out in Canaan. And when Israel moves in, she becomes just another tribe focused on themselves. But the fact is that when Israel moves in, militarily, sociologically, she's not up to the task. And so what we're going to see in the book of Judges over the next few weeks is that Israel perpetually becomes a victim of their stronger and more powerful neighbor. How do you help a person who's a shopaholic, who watches the Cube, who is always on Amazon.com, who is always ordering things on the line, who has their credit cards maxed out to the max? In a sense, we are all shopaholics of spirituality. We're always instinctively looking for that next thing that's going to fix me and make me beautiful and make me feel powerful and make me desirable and make me the center of the world and hopefully have others look at me and adore me. Who can rescue us from such a thing? In many ways, that is our case. And what happens in the book of Judges is that Israel gets herself into a bind and once again calls out to God, and God calls a judge. And that judge comes in and rescues. But in the book of Judges, we will find that those judges come in all different sorts. Some are moral, some are immoral, some are brutally violent, some are weak in some obvious and terrible ways. And each of them, in a sense, just makes the monthly credit card bill for shopaholic Israel. And after a generation, after the wolf has been taken from the door, after they've gotten a little bit of breathing room, they go back and they do it all again. And God will send another judge and another rescuer and rescues them for a time, but then they do it all again. And that, in a sense, becomes the story of Israel, sometimes in more dramatic fashion, sometimes in not. But even after the Davidic kingdom, which will come in Samuel and Kings, and even after the great empires will come down and take Israel and make Israel her vassal, for generation after generation, Israel continues to try all kinds of different ways to effect their own rescue, and then Jesus comes. And Jesus shows them that their problems were never really the Philistines. They were never really the Midianites. They were never really the Greeks or the Assyrians or the Babylonians or even the Romans. Our problem is ourself. This hungry, greedy, spiritual self that is just dying to somehow find some mechanism to elevate ourselves and glorify ourselves and become the center of the universe. Jesus comes in as the center of the universe and says, I who have everything will make myself nothing for you. And instead of, like the judges, just paying this month's credit card bill, I am going to, in fact, pay all of your debts, and I am going to give you my credit rating and rescue you to this degree. And then I will look at you and I will ask, now that I have rescued you, what will you do with your life? The reason spirituality is so much fun is that it is so free. And religion, however, is so binding. The word religion actually comes from the Latin, which flowed up to us from the Middle English and the French. It means to bind. It's an obligation. It's a bond. It's a reverence. Religion is about form and structure. Religion is about discipline. Religion is about figuring out how to get from A to B. One of the ironies about life is that we all have desires, but if our desire is ever going to take us anywhere, we must add to it discipline. This afternoon, many of us will watch football. I dare bet most of us have spent a good deal of the week eating whatever we wanted, not exercising, doing whatever we feel like. And all those football players on the field have been doing what all week? Eating right, practicing, working, being in the gym, lifting weights. Why? Because they know that their performance, if they even get on the field for that little hour this afternoon, means all of this stuff brings them to it. Now, the difficulty we have is that we think of this as qualification, but actually when it comes to religion and the Christian faith, this comes under gratitude. Because remember what I said, Jesus comes in and he doesn't just pay the monthly credit card bill, he pays off the balance and gives us his credit rating and says, I have made you free. What will you do now? And if we don't want to descend back into our miseries, as we usually do, as we often do, we begin to say, Lord, I will make you my master, the Lord and Savior of my heart, and I will begin to follow you even when it doesn't feel good, even when it doesn't feel spiritual. We see this all the time in our lives. Young couple has a baby, everyone around them says, oh, the baby's beautiful, oh, the baby's wonderful. And then, of course, the baby's schedule is upside down, and all the parents and grandparents and well-wishers come during the day and coo on the baby, and then everyone goes home to bed at night, and what does the baby do? Cry. Everyone knows that baby will cry, and that baby will say, I need to eat, I need to eat. And who has to get up in the middle of the night? Probably the mom, who has just had the bottom half of her body ripped open terribly, has to learn to do a new skill that she never knew before, desperately wanting for sleep because she can heal, and she gets up in the middle of the night to do what? To feed that baby. Now she might be feeling all heroic. Yes, I did it, but guess what? A few hours later, the baby will want to do it again. And the next day, and the next night, and the baby will grow, and it'll go from milk to solid food to on and on and on. And as one person said, warning to all your parents, after you have a child, you will never be happier than the most miserable child. This is religion. But it is because of the sacrifice of the mother that the baby has life. And it is because of the sacrifice of our Lord that we have life. And so on one hand, spirituality is fun. On the other hand, and it has to be gratitude-based, religion is how we actually see fruit. The book of James says this: if you think you are religious, and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive, if any of you thinks they are religious, and do not bridle their tongues, but deceive their hearts, their religion is worthless. Religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this: to care for orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world. Now, a couple of books ago, I talked a lot about the rider and the elephant, because as human beings, this is how we are. There's the part of us that is rational and logical and is full of intention. And you may leave today and say, Pastor, I'm going to be a better person. I'm going to be more organized. I'm going to be more disciplined about my money. I'm going to pray every day. I'm going to come to church every week. And I've got all of these plans that I'm going to accomplish that. And that's a lovely thought. But that's the rider sitting on top of the elephant. Most of what we actually do is governed by the elephant. And what governs the elephant? Oh, that food over there looks good. Oh, I've been walking all day and I'm getting tired. Oh, I'd really like to go over to the watering hole and have a mud bath. And this is our conflict. And this is why this is all part of gratitude, because Christ, in fact, has done the savings. Christ, in fact, has paid the debt, canceled the credit cards, given us his credit score, and now we, the rider on the elephant, have to ask, how can I actually respond to him in any way that reflects the gift he gave to me? And that's why, in fact, even though I've been talking for the last 20 minutes to your riders, probably the most important thing we're going to do right now for your elephant is this. Because most of our spiritualities, we want to accomplish something. But what's true about spirituality is that it is a matter of the heart. And what needs to be true of living into the reality of Christ in our lives is it needs to be a matter of the heart. And so this is exactly why Christ gave us this meal. Because he knew the words talk to the rider, but what does the elephant understand? Food. So on the night he was betrayed, he took bread and he broke it. And he said, "This is my body given for you." Now, I've known a lot of characters in my lifetime. One of the things I've noticed is that for even people who struggle with predictability, who struggle with repetition, who struggle with getting up on time, who struggle with going to work, who struggle with being in any way kind to their neighbor, who struggle with the very basics of living a social life, even those people often still love their mothers. Why? Because their mothers were the one who got up for them and fed them at night and changed their diaper. And when they went off to school, their mothers put a lunch in their bag for them. And when everyone else in the world hated them, their mother still loved them and spoke to their elephant. And that is what this meal does. Because when Christ takes the bread and picks it up and says, "This is my body broken for you," to the degree that you can see that this man, under no obligation, paid your debt and gives you life. Now suddenly the heart is engaged and the elephant begins to know, and the rider can actually make some progress with the elephant. And we begin to receive what it is that we most long for, which is to be as generous as the one who saved us. So this meal is for you. And none of you earned it. Every one of you is a sinner. On that score, we are all the same. But when he offers you this meal, he says, do you take my gift? Do you receive it? Do you wish to be part of me? Do you wish to be whole? Do you wish to be new? This meal is for you.